Okay, well, good morning. Welcome to
Morning.
Zoomtopia studio.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Of course, yes. My name is Kelsie. I'm a people research consultant at Zoom, organizational psychologist by training. I'm really excited to talk to you about two topics really close to my heart: age diversity in the workplace, future of work and hybrid work. Yeah. Well, we'll jump right into it. So I think it's really wild to think about the magnitude of changes that have happened in the workplace, especially when you think about how many people are active in the workforce.
Yeah.
Millions of people, right?
Yeah.
And with them, they bring age diversity, career development diversity, and it's a lot to think about as an employer and as a leader. What are some of the key factors that drive some of the changes in expectations and perceptions across age groups?
I think a big part of that is your experience, right? The way that we even think about generations, we're grouping them based off of things that they all experience. And those experiences shaped how they then look at life, look at their careers, look at family, right? So the first thing is really understanding what are the events that are really shaping what generations are expecting from the workplace, right? Once we narrow that down and understand that, we have a bit more compassion, a bit more understanding as to why they want those things, as to why they operate the way that they do. Boomers, for example, they entered the workforce after World War II, where work was really made and curated based off of productivity.
Yeah.
Nobody cared if you liked your job. Nobody cared if you liked the person that you sat next with or sat next to. It was really about doing the most for the organization in this hierarchical way. So, of course, it would make sense why some work-life balance factors may not be of high importance to them, right? Because that's not what they necessarily were thrown into, and that's okay. So I think the first part is really understanding what each organization values, but even going specific and more deeper into that, what each person values. As people, we're all motivated by different things, just fundamentally, right? So even just because I'm a part of a cohort Gen Z doesn't necessarily mean that I'm motivated by a lot of the same trends that Gen Z may be moving towards or motivated by. So I think the first part is really understanding the cohort that you're working with, and then taking it a step further to understanding the specific employees that you're dealing with within your organization and what they're dealing with and how all of that has factored into what they are expecting from you in the workplace.
Yeah, I really like your take on the nuances there, that there are some of those sort of cluster events that different generations have, and it helps shape their experiences and their expectations for the workplace. And at the same time, you're saying the nuances within those groups too are so critical for people to understand forward. That's really impactful. So as an organization that's thinking about this, these sort of groupings by generations and then the individuals within them, what are some practices that people can put out there, like structural practices that they could do to sort of make sure that collaboration can happen across the whole age spectrum?
Yeah. The number one thing, and I almost hate recommending this because it sometimes sounds corny when I say it, but it's so true, and it has fundamentally helped Juve, the company that I operate at, really change our company culture. We're fundamentally primarily Gen Z, but we do have non-Gen Zers that operate at our company. We call them resident millennials.
Oh my gosh,
We call them resident millennials. And the number one thing that has really turned around our company culture was our weekly Friday calls that have nothing to do with the business, have nothing to do with how well you're operating in the role. It was just 30 minutes of straight community, straight collaborating. Sometimes we do brainstorms that are unrelated and just random. Sometimes we have people do rap battles, like rap your favorite sitcom theme song. So we had our millennials rapping like Fresh Prince. And what that really does is open up an opportunity for them to get to learn each other on their own grounds, right? In something that doesn't feel forced.
Right.
We know that you have this weekly meeting. We know that it's something that we're going to do, something community related. We use Zoom. We randomize our breakout rooms every time. So you don't know who you're going to get, and the interaction is natural. Of course, some people are more quiet or more introverted, and that's okay. We don't force them to do anything that they don't want to, but that even allows them to engage in a way that they would feel comfortable, as compared to like coffee chats, right? Where you're one-on-one and you kind of feel forced to think of a conversation or forced to make something up. So having those group activities that has nothing related to their role, nothing related to the bottom line, just simply about building community, has been super, super helpful. Because when you do that in an environment where folks don't feel forced and they have the ability to connect with each other, they're more likely to do it in other ways, right? Or to reach out to each other if they don't normally work with each other day to day.
All right, like I really liked your rap. Hey, can we talk about this project?
Absolutely. That has hands down been super helpful with making folks feel comfortable enough to challenge, making folks feel comfortable enough to have conversations, because that's the important part, right? That we want that energy to transfer to the workplace. So we have to really set up natural environments for them to feel comfortable to have those conversations, whether it be about work or other things. Like I remember we had an open conversation about adoption in the office.
Wow.
And Gen Zers had an opinion, even though half of everybody at my company who's Gen Zer is not married. And a few of them have children. So they're coming from a perspective that is quite different from our COO who's married and has kids and has friends who have kids, et cetera. And they felt comfortable enough to having an open conversation about adoption, where Gen Z is completely on a different spectrum and they're talking about whether that's ethical, et cetera.
Oh, wow.
We have somebody who's married that's talking about what it's actively like to build a family. Right. And I remember the Gen Zer on our next Friday call spoke to that, about how like having that conversation with our COO really opened up their mind. But I think that we're able to have those tough conversations because we build space where they feel comfortable enough to have difficult conversations, where they feel comfortable enough to collab.
Yeah, I really like that takeaway. It's sort of the non-work aspects that actually indirectly impact work later on. And I think what you said that's really important is the fit. It doesn't matter if you're extroverted or introverted in those Friday calls.
Yeah.
You're welcome and valued for being there, even if you don't talk the whole time, right?
Yeah.
And that psychological safety, as I call it as a psychologist, let's build later on, sort of translates to asking tough questions, challenging things.
Yeah.
And I also think your discussion about adoption is really interesting because you have people who have been through different experiences talking about the same topic. And that's just such a good example of age diversity in that whole spectrum.
Yeah. Or even the fact that we were talking about that in the workplace.
I know.
Like, I don't even remember how that conversation came up, but it was a conversation that two humans were having in the workplace, and that it came up on a Friday work call about the fact that they were able to disagree, and the person who was older being able to share his experience and open up the Gen Zer's mind, which I think is important because Gen Z sort of has this stigma that they are difficult and don't like to listen, et cetera. So I thought that was even great that they were even open enough to even admit that on the Friday call, being like, I had this conversation that was completely unrelated to, work with our COO, and it really opened my eyes, and I appreciate him being open to sharing that with me. So I think that that's really mind-blowing and really important for the workplace.
I agree, bringing that humanity piece in.
Yeah.
So speaking of people leaders, what are something leaders can do to make sure, when they're thinking about their team and their individuals, to make sure there's harmonious connection within their teams on the age diversity aspect?
Yeah. So I think, again, the earlier piece that I mentioned about having more opportunities to collaborate outside of the work is super important. But I think what's also important when we're thinking about leaders is understanding and communicating to our direct reports or just the people that we manage that this is a two-way street. And what I mean by that is I'm currently getting my MBA at Fordham, and one of the things, thank you, it's
awesome.
Terrible, working full-time in part-time school, don't recommend it.
Yes.
But one of the things that I learned that I would never stop repeating wherever I go, wherever I'm having these conversations, is the fact that your management relationship is a two-way street. And it's like we only think about that at like when we think about our romantic relationships or our platonic relationships, but it really takes two people to make a relationship. So of course it's our job as the leaders, as the managers, to have oversight into what our team is doing, but it's also our job to educate our direct reports in our team about managing up.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't have a lot of conversations with our team about managing up, and the importance of what you bring to the relationship is just as important as what I'm bringing to the relationship, right? I do not dictate how this goes and what you need. I need that communication. I need equal understanding, right? But I also think it's important that if managers are going to do that, that they embody exactly what they're asking. Because we're now entering a workforce where it's no longer do as I say and not as I do, like what our parents used to say. Like that didn't work for our kids, and it definitely isn't working now in the workforce. Yeah. So it's super important that if we're going to do that, we also embody the behaviors that we want our folks to have. So if we're asking folks to give us the benefit of the doubt more as leaders and to believe that we have their best interests at heart, when are the times that you have not given your employees the benefit of the doubt?
Yeah.
Is it when they were 5 minutes late and you were down their neck? Or was it when they asked if they could work home for this day instead of this day, right? So I think that we really have to be cognizant of what we're asking for and the ways that we're not showing up in those ways, one. And then two, really creating the opportunity to upskill the folks that we're managing and having people relationships with on how they can better manage their relationships with the folks that they're reporting to or working closely with.
Yeah. I really like that piece you talked about, that dyadic relationship, right? That top-down, bottom-up experience is really critical. And I think one piece you mentioned that I really like is about feedback. Like, you have to be able to share with each other, communicate well. And that's scary for a lot of people, but I think it's really important. You're right. With all these different experiences that workplaces have, that has to be a key part of it, that relationship. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we're going to talk about my favorite topic ever, future of work, which means so many things to so many people.
Yes.
Since 2020, we've seen a reckoning in what work means and how it's done and where it's done. And I think with that comes a lot of unique challenges that we had really never faced before 2020. We're 3 years away.
Yeah.
And I think looking back, it's shaken up a lot of our assumptions about how work has been done and why we do it that way.
Yeah.
I'd love your opinion on what is the biggest win we got out of sort of shaking up the way work was done?
Yeah, I'm laughing because I've been saying this since I got here. Shout out to Zoom because they are the reason why I hate going into the office. So the biggest win for me, hands down,
I love it,
is remote work. I love working from, I am 10 times more like efficient, productive when I'm at home, when I'm at my little desk, when I have my cat that gives me a little kiss every now and then. Like, I just feel so much more grounded in my own space and a lot more comfortable. But coming outside of me, I think it did show us that we can maintain that productivity, because I remember asking to work from home pre-pandemic and sort of my boss being like, why can't you come into the office?
Yeah.
And that's no shade, because a lot of us embodied that same, mantra and that same thought of like, what do you mean work from home? You're productive at work. That's where you should be the most productive. And that's simply not true for a lot of reasons, whether it's neurodivergent reasons, right? Like, I have the sensory overload be driving me crazy, right? So like working at home genuinely is helpful for me.
Yeah.
And I think that has even opened up conversations about accessibility, right? That working from home can be a lot more accessible to a lot of different communities.
Yeah.
So for me, the biggest win is definitely working from home.
Yeah.
I think another win that we're not quite there yet in the U.S., but I know a lot of folks internationally are testing, is the 4-day work week.
Yes. Yeah.
I am pro 4-day work.
Ready.
I am ready for the 4-day work week ASAP. I know that's not a win yet, but I do think it's important that like we're even having this conversation. I think that's super important that we're even testing it in places like London or England, etc. So to me, those are the things that I really, really appreciate, because I think that gives time back to the employees. And I fundamentally feel like nothing runs without them there to do their job, and they have to feel the best and be their best in order to do that. And I think that working from home and 4-day work week are things that will allow them to feel their best.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. Can't pour from an empty cup sentiment. And I think, a lot of people learn about remote work through Zoom.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to hear. Like, you hear it all the time, and it's really interesting. Another key piece you brought up is how we're still continuing to learn from that, right? It really shook all of our understanding, and now people are testing out different models of work, whether it's 4 days or hybrid, or some teams have 2 days in office, 2 days at home, and that sort of dispersed team experience is really interesting, and we're learning as we go.
Yeah.
When you think about teams that are dispersed, so, on one day, half the team's in the office, the same day someone's remote, there may be across time zones globally.
Yeah.
What are some things leaders can do to really manage the connection and collaboration for that aspect of work?
Yeah. And that is something transparently that we honestly really struggled with during the pandemic. We've kind of always been a hybrid company because a large portion of our company are contractors. We have 30 full-time folks, 200 plus contractors. All those contractors are remote in all 50 states and across the globe. So we sort of always had to navigate, okay, we have some folks here, but we have majority of our team international. But what really pushed it over the edge was that when we initially started the company, we only had 2 people that were full-time, and the rest were were remote. So it wasn't really that much of a difference. That really changes when you have 30 folks who are full-time who want some engagement, right? And want to feel some sense of belonging. So one thing that I definitely would recommend not to do is any type of hybrid and like a hybrid event, like a virtual and IRL sort of activity. I definitely would not recommend anybody doing that.
It's so challenging to manage.
It's so challenging to manage, one, but two, you fundamentally feel left out when you're not physically there. If you have like part of the team physically there experiencing something, and then you're kind of in person, you're not really getting the same, or excuse me, you're kind of virtual, you're not getting the same effect, and you often do feel left out because you have camaraderie between the people that are there. They're talking about other things, there's sidebar conversations. So it is really hard to keep folks feeling a sense of belonging, I actually feel like they often feel excluded.
Right.
So I think what's actually helpful and can take a lot more time and a lot more resources, but the ROI is better because you have folks that actually feel like a sense of community is separate events, right? So we do things specifically for the folks that are in person, and then we do have virtual events or virtual opportunities that we do offer our team. And then we're also very, very open about what they want. Because we spend a lot of time assuming the types of virtual events that they want, assuming the type of in-person events that they want, assuming the type of resources that they want, just in terms of being an employee, in terms of being a person. We spend a lot of time just simply asking them, what do you want to see next? You tell us what is the best use of your time.
Yeah.
Because we also don't want to use resources that you feel like aren't fulfilling your job or you feel like aren't fulfilling you as a person. So transparently, we ask them now, like, what would you guys like to see? So even on that Friday call, we take opinions on what they want to see next week. And a lot of the time it's something collaborative. Like we talked about doing those brainstorms that we do together. Sometimes they're about a random topic or sometimes they are directly related to the business. Like hey, we have this client that asked us to do X, Y, and Z. We're struggling to think of something. Let's do a company brainstorm. And we'll do a company brainstorm together. So I think one, really being intentional about what folks are asking for and catering to that is super important rather than assuming, okay, this is what I wanted when I was X, Y, and Z, or when I first started my career. I think going to them and letting them be the source, not talking about them, but talking to them. That's something we're really big on at our company is the number one recommendation that I would do.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think it ties back to your key point in the beginning about we have these groups of generations, but individuals within them can vary so much in what they want. Same thing goes for remote and hybrid work or in person. You would think you have assumptions about one group of workforce type, and maybe there are some trends, but there are also individuals there as well. So if you're not listening, you're not really knowing what they need. And that fit between resources and need is critical. I mean, we've all been in a workforce situation where you don't have the resource you need to fit the demand that you're facing, and it is challenging. So it's really great to hear that you are listening to your employees, asking them in the first place, and then trying to deliver that in the future. That's great.
Yes.
Well, I want to wrap up with one overarching question. So we talked about a lot of things changing. The boundaries between work and non-work have been blurred. There's no longer a traditional 9 to 5 in a lot of settings. And now we are facing age diversity questions, and we're also facing workforce diversity questions where some people are remote and some people are hybrid, or the whole mix of flexible work. What is your one sentence statement about how we can do this better? Or do you have a mantra that you want to leave our audience with today?
Oh man, a one sentence
or two. Two is fine too.
On how we can do this better. I actually might need a moment for this one for editing purposes. Didn't everybody know? I need a moment to think about this one. One sentence on how I think we could do it. That's a really good question.
Or two. Two is okay too.
But I just feel like there's genuinely so many different aspects of this conversation that we miss that it's hard to put it in sentences. So I'll just say what I'm thinking and then hopefully it's good. But in general, I think one is assumptions. I think that we Gen Zers make assumptions about everybody else and everybody else makes assumptions about us. And there's no way that we can get anywhere with those assumptions. And I think there are a few reasons why each group shouldn't be making assumptions. The first one, our older generations are usually the ones in power, right? Mm-hmm. So although it's very hard to work with Gen Z, I'm sure we're annoying. I'm sure it can be frustrating having these tough conversations. At the end of the day, we're not the ones. Typically, I'm a caveat, and I recognize my privilege being in a space like this and operating in the position that I do. But typically, Gen Zers aren't in my position, aren't on stages like this, being able to advocate what they want in the workplace. So they don't have positions of power. So it's really about the passion that they have, and how do we channel that passion into something that's productive, into a conversation that's productive, or into a movement that's productive. Because this is a movement. To be clear, as we know, millions of people quit their jobs because of the Great Resignation. That is a movement. That is not something we take lightly, right? So I think assumptions is one part of it. And I think that Gen Z can do better about making assumptions because that's actively what we fight against.
Right?
Right? We want to be heard. We want to be seen as different people. So I think we can do a better job at not having assumptions about other folks. So that actually was one sentence. That's what I would leave it at.
Period.
Yeah, period. I would say that we can do better about assumptions and have a lot more open conversations.
I love it. I'm really grateful for your insight today. This was so fun chatting with you.
Yes, it was so much fun.
And thank you again. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Oh, I love Zoom.
Me too.